Scott Peterson making headlines again, this time with the LA Innocence Project taking up the case and the conversation, saying, hey, there's some new potential evidence here that, well, maybe it'll help Scott Peterson. Maybe it'll point to some innocence, if there is any to be found. Joining me to discuss, host of the podcast Defense Diaries, Bob Motta, defense attorney. Bob, you're a defense attorney. You can take this from that angle of, it's Scott Peterson. A lot of people have already said, and have judged him, and so has the courts, of being guilty. But is there room? Is there anything to this with the L.A. Innocence Project taking up the case and saying, hey, we should take a look at this closer?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get in, like any of the Innocence Projects, and you and I were talking, we want to make a distinction. It's not the Innocence Project, but I believe that it's in the network of
Hmm.
Innocence Projects. There's Innocence Projects all across the country. Obviously, kind of the main one can't take on every case, and they get
Sure.
65,000. They currently have 65,000 letters that they're trying to pour through, trying to figure out which cases and they vet their cases,
Hmm.
I think all of them do, maybe to different degrees, but I think typically they're not going to jump into a case if they feel it's completely fruitless.
Hmm.
So, they must have felt that there was something there.
Hmm.
And based on what I've seen with respect to the pleadings, it seems to be revolving around this burnt out van that they happen to find about a mile away from the Petersons' home,
Yeah.
that had blood in it,
Hmm.
and they're asking the courts and they think that it could be connected. And it was found the day after Lacey went disappeared, So, I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
To be honest with you, when I first heard about it, I was more, I wouldn't say optimistic, but I thought it may have had a better chance of succeeding when I thought that it was related to the van that the burglars
Hmm.
that Lacey is supposedly to have happened upon while she was walking the dog.
Sure.
Who I always thought I thought that that was a viable
Yeah.
explanation.
Sure.
It's like Nancy Grace didn't,
Hmm.
but I did.
Sure.
It's like Nancy Grace like really flamed through Scott Peterson.
Yeah. Right away, the
And then
verdict was in with Nancy, but yeah.
oh
Yeah.
man, no question. And I mean, he was a philandering piece of shit.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. I mean, like, not trying to make him into a good guy, but him being a bad husband, a terrible husband,
Hmm.
an awful husband,
Yeah.
not necessarily make him a murderer.
Sure.
So, like, that never swayed me. Like,
Hmm.
I never, but I do this for a living. So, the way that they couch defendants in the press and even the state does it,
Yeah.
where they equate him being awful in one respect, then turns him into something else. And that's just not always true. Sometimes it is,
Hmm.
sometimes it isn't. I think you have to really kind of dig into the facts there. So, I mean, it's interesting, man. I'm certainly going to follow it. I certainly want to know. Can you hear that in the background?
No,
Okay, good.
we're good.
My cleaning people are here.
Oh,
Um, vacuuming behind me furiously.
I'm waiting for my doorbell to ring right now, actually.
All right, well, when it does, you
Yeah.
can answer. Uh, so yeah, I mean, like I'll clearly be following it. I'm anxious to see where this goes. And basically, I mean, they're at the juncture where they have to convince a judge
Hmm.
that there's enough there that the judge is going to allow them to do the DNA testing. I mean, like a PCRA, which is a Post Conviction Relief Act petition, is not uh, a fishing expedition. I mean, they have to have some receipts. They have to come with some receipts beyond just like, oh, well, we think that this might be something that might
Hmm.
be important. That's not the purpose of a Post Conviction Relief Act. And typically when you're coming with those, they're very late in the process. He's typically gone through the appellate process in full, his direct appeals. He's appealed it up to the Supreme Court, been denied all through that process, and now typically when you can bring a probable cause or a PCRA, you're going to have new evidence,
Hmm.
newly discovered evidence. That's the kind of the key to it, and
Hmm.
it's got to be legitimate,
Yeah.
and it's got to be compelling. So the question of whether or not the court is going to find that compelling uh, is another question. And who's to say that Scott Peterson didn't use that van, even if it were Lacey's blood?
Sure. I
You
mean,
know,
and
it
that,
doesn't.
yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, it's, are we pretty much, is this all hinging on that van and that appearance of what might be blood in
Right.
it? Like, once we know the answer to that, if there is either of their DNA, either of their blood in that, and blood and DNA are two different things, but if
Yes.
it is there, then there seems to be, there might be something to it. If it's not, though, is it really just a big nothing burger?
Yeah. Essentially. I mean,
Yeah.
and just so people understand, I mean, blood contains DNA,
Yes.
or it can. It's an organic
Mhm.
material. It's biological material. So, um, I mean, that's what they're hoping to test. They're
Sure.
hoping to test the blood that was in there to see if there is a usable sample,
What do
like
we know about
within
this,
the
and
blood.
why now? Why 20 years later are we suddenly paying attention to a van that appears to have had blood in it? I mean, where was this back then? Was this looked over? Was this were they unaware that this existed? I guess that's the question.
That's gonna that's gonna have to be the case because if it was available to the defense, and we're talking about Mark Garagos back then,
Mhm.
like if it was
He'd have
in
been
the
all over it.
discovery, if it was there and existed and he just missed it, it's not newly discovered,
Yeah.
so it would have had to have been something where Peterson, doing his own pleadings over the course of many years, was in a situation where he ran into, maybe he was doing FOIA requests, maybe he ran into it, maybe, whatever he found or the Innocence Project found in terms of getting to the point where they said, we'll take a look at the case, was a situation. See my cleaning people creeping back. You'll have to cut that part, man. Oh,
Let's
she's
leave it
ducking
for those
through.
of us
She's
listening on
ducking through
audio.
with her,
There's a
ducking through with
video.
the mop.
There's a video version of this on YouTube. If you're just listening to the podcast, if you'd like to see
Yeah,
the
yeah,
animated version of our
um,
conversation here today.
yeah. So but like something triggered the Innocence Project to want to look into it, and they clearly know whether or not they're going to make the argument, or they'll
Yeah.
be able to make the argument that it is in fact newly discovered. If it was there and it existed and was ignored, that doesn't constitute newly discovered evidence. So we have to assume that there's an argument
Hmm.
in place, that it was in fact newly discovered, and maybe they
Yeah.
they were doing FOIA requests for around the area,
Hmm.
and then they came upon this police report and said, "Hey, man, a mile away from the house, burnt out van, blood in
Yeah.
it. Let's take a look."
Sure.
Maybe, so we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's a long shot.
It is.
Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
It's like I said, I was far more intrigued when I thought that it was related to
Hmm.
the burglars that Lacey allegedly had seen,
Hmm.
because that was always kind of the only other concept to me that may have made sense,
Hmm.
and I know a lot of people with respect to that Peterson case, because they really didn't have much evidence against him. They had
Sure.
a lot of things that looked bad,
A lot.
but it was all, yeah, I mean, but it was all through the lens of he's a cheater.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's like, so that makes it all, it clouds it a little bit, that he's going out to the marina, that morning, and he's got the anchors, which is not unusual for a boat owner to make
Hmm.
cement anchors. I mean, it's just not.
But it's also
Um,
a bit unusual, though, if you don't know how to fish for the fish you're claiming you're fishing for. Him claiming he was fishing for sturgeon, which, you're up in Chicago. I'm assuming you know what sturgeon are. I'm from Wisconsin. They're a specific type of fish, and you don't catch
yes,
them with a line. That's not how that works.
they're
Um,
very prehistoric.
yeah, they're basically dinosaur
Sturgeon.
fish. They can
They
be more
really
than
are.
100 years old. My dad
Mhm.
fishes for them in Wisconsin every year,
Yep.
and it's not, you don't go out on the boat and catch them like that. That's just not how that works.
Right.
I mean, so either he's just a really dumb, but I mean, again, doesn't make him a murderer. Could just be a really idiotic fisherman too. I mean, he's not the
Yeah.
brightest guy, it seems, in a lot of senses. So
Yeah.
again, looks weird, but that's always the case. There's always something very close on this case where it's like not quite, but
Like, my whole thing with the boat has always been he's in a small boat, and when you're in marinas like that, especially like in that area, you're gonna have a lot of very large boats.
mhm,
So, the concept that he had Lacey's remains in that boat and like the witnesses who saw him in the boat wouldn't have seen
mhm,
something that looked unusual because they're going to have a vantage point where they're
sure,
looking down into his small boat.
mhm,
I don't know. Like there's yeah, it's one of those
yeah.
cases that we'll probably never know the truth, and at this point he's convicted, so
Well, if the
but we'll see
evidence,
how it
yeah,
plays out, man.
exactly. If the evidence is there, then we'll see how it plays out, and the right things will happen. If it's not, then it's simply not. Hey, it's Tony Brueski. If you like the podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and press that bell so you don't miss any of our updates on the cases we're following for you right here at the Hidden Killers podcast from True Crime Today. And thanks